So 84% of women in New York City between the ages of 18 and 29 voted for Mamdani. Not a surprise, not a surprise to me, and I don't think it's a surprise to you either. We pretty much know why, right? Women have a propensity to vote with their empathy, especially young women. They think that socialism is a good thing, again, because of the empathy. They want to protect the migrants, they want to protect the poor people. And the education system, is full of propaganda, especially in places like New York City. And women tend to be more conformist, especially young women tend to be more conformist minded. Those propensities is not an excuse to do that. Young women should not be voting for essentially communism, right? Or for illegal immigration. Illegal immigration from third world countries, mind you, from Latin America and the Middle East in the case of New York City. So what's happening is, and I've discussed this many times already, and I'll discuss the solutions to this too. What's happening is that women have a propensity, they have the empathy impulse and the conformist impulse, because to do otherwise requires logical reasoning. You have to think for yourself to not conform to what other people are doing. You have to think for yourself to override your emotional impulses. And women, generally speaking, in the West, are not held accountable. Okay, they're given a whole lot of access to society in general. Women are very much catered to in both public and private sectors, whether it be, hiring practices, whether it be, admissions to universities, whatever. And so the thinking isn't there as much. They don't have to think independently. The system caters to them. So women, I think they understand this. They align themselves with the system more, and so they conform, and they're pretty much taken care of. You can see a lot of examples of women that do think independently, but they're rare. And that's usually, such a woman has some kind of a history where she had to think, okay? Most women, young women particularly, don't think on their own because they don't have to think on their own. So that's part of the issue. The other issue is that young people in general vote this way because of the education system, okay? So that brings me to one of the solutions, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Politically, and this should be discussed openly, is that voting should only be done with people who have property. Because if you have property, you have to maintain that property. You have to be able to think, right? You have to think about, okay, well, how do I maintain this business? How do I maintain this piece of real estate? And such people tend to be older on average. They tend to be smarter, and they tend not to be communists, right? You can't, people who are communists are people who are either young and haven't lived in the real world, or they're people that don't have anything, right? People from third world countries that don't have a stake in the country, which, by the way, property ownership gives you a stake in the jurisdiction that you're voting in. So property ownership as a requirement for voting would fix that issue largely, okay? The other issue is the ideas that are being promoted, right? Through our education system. The education system in New York City is propaganda, right? And these young people are voting the way they're voting because the education system and the entertainment media, whether it be on TikTok, whether it be coming from Hollywood, whatever, is promoting this socialistic, nihilistic perspective, okay? And that has to change. That's another very big reason why we got Mamdani as the future mayor of New York City. So that's it. You have to fix the philosophy, and you have to restrict voting to people who own property. And you wouldn't get people like him in the positions that we are. You would actually have a more intelligent debate. You probably wouldn't get globalists at all in these positions. Now, arguably, you might get neocons, which is a problem, but at least you have intelligent discussion, and maybe even that you would have a lot less. You would have less likelihood of those people being in power. But property ownership and fixing the ideas, changing the intellectual discussion where logic and reasoning is upheld as critical to the foundation of any idea that's being promoted. You wouldn't get 84% of young women voting the way they voted in New York City.